Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, a cozy corner where we dive deep into the world of literature with a warm cup of coffee in hand. Today, we're exploring Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche, a choice that already sets you apart from the crowd. While others are mindlessly scrolling or binge-watching the latest series, you're here, ready to embark on a profound journey of philosophical exploration and self-discovery. That speaks volumes about your curiosity and desire to grow. Zarathustra is a book that stands at the intersection of philosophy and literature, renowned for its poetic brilliance and philosophical depth. It challenges us, forces us to confront our own beliefs, and invites us to think deeply about the nature of existence. It's a book that has influenced many, including existentialist thinkers and modern-day philosophers. Notably, the book has caught the attention of influential figures like the German philosopher Martin Heidegger and the existential psychologist Viktor Frankl, both of whom found Nietzsche's work pivotal in shaping their own ideas. Friedrich Nietzsche, the mastermind behind this piece, was a philosopher known for his radical thinking and complex ideas. His life was marked by profound personal struggles and a quest for truth that ultimately drove him to write this masterpiece. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Beyond Good and Evil. Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher who dared to challenge conventional moral and religious concepts. His life was a tapestry of intense intellectual endeavors and profound struggles, including a battle with illness that eventually claimed his mental and physical health. Thus Spoke Zarathustra reflects his philosophical journey and personal quest for meaning. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mug, when someone asks you about the most audacious philosophical declaration ever made. Well, grab that coffee a little tighter, because we're about to dive into one of the most provocative openings in all of literature. Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra doesn't just knock on your door with new ideas, it kicks the door down entirely. The story begins with Zarathustra, a 30-year-old man who decides to leave civilization behind and retreat to the mountains for 10 years of solitude. Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time you spent even 10 minutes completely alone with your thoughts, without your phone, without distractions? Zarathustra spends an entire decade in contemplation, and when he finally emerges, he's bursting with wisdom that he simply must share with humanity. But here's where it gets fascinating. As Zarathustra descends from his mountain sanctuary, he encounters an old hermit living in the forest. This hermit, who turns out to be a saint, recognizes Zarathustra and remembers him from years past. The saint asks why Zarathustra is returning to humanity, warning him that people will only mock and reject his wisdom. It's like that friend who asks why you're bothering to explain cryptocurrency to your parents. Some people just aren't ready for revolutionary ideas. The hermit saint reveals something crucial. He spends his days in the forest singing songs and praising God. And this is where Nietzsche drops his philosophical bombshell. After parting ways with the saint, Zarathustra reflects on their encounter and realizes something earth-shattering. Could it be possible? This old saint in the forest has not yet heard anything of this, that God is dead. Now, before you spit out your coffee, let's unpack what Nietzsche really means here. When he declares that God is dead, he's not making a theological statement about divine existence. Instead, he's observing that traditional religious and moral frameworks have lost their power to guide human behavior in the modern world. Think about it. How many people today make major life decisions based purely on religious doctrine compared to, say, personal fulfillment, career advancement, or social media validation? Zarathustra continues his descent, and encounters a crowd gathered around a tightrope walker preparing to perform between two towers. Here, Nietzsche gives us a perfect metaphor for the human condition. The tightrope walker represents humanity suspended between two states, what we were and what we could become. We're no longer simple animals driven purely by instinct, but we're not yet the evolved beings we could be either. We're literally walking a tightrope over an abyss. But then something tragic happens. Another performer, a jester, leaps over the tightrope walker, causing him to fall and die. The crowd, which had been cheering moments before, suddenly disperses in horror. Everyone abandons the fallen man except Zarathustra, who stays with the dying performer. The tightrope walker, with his last breath, fears he's going to hell for his dangerous profession. Zarathustra comforts him, explaining that there is no devil and no hell, only the life we create for ourselves. This scene is incredibly powerful because it shows us how most people respond to crisis and failure. When someone falls, literally or metaphorically, how quickly do we scatter? Think about cancel culture, or how quickly people distance themselves from friends going through difficult times. Zarathustra, however, represents a different approach, staying present with suffering and offering a new perspective on meaning and purpose. After the tightrope walker dies, Zarathustra carries the body and reflects on his mission. He realizes that speaking to crowds is futile. People aren't ready for his message about creating their own values and becoming who they truly are. Instead, he decides to seek out individuals, companions who are ready to hear about the concept he calls the Overman or Superman. Not a superhero, but a human being who has overcome traditional limitations and created their own meaning. The prologue ends with Zarathustra's resolution to find followers who are ready to move beyond conventional morality and religion to create something entirely new. It's like being the first person in your friend group to realize that maybe the path everyone expects you to follow, college, corporate job, house in the suburbs, retirement, might not be the only way to live a meaningful life. What makes this prologue so relevant today is how it captures our current cultural moment. We're living in an era where traditional institutions, religion, government, even the nuclear family, have lost much of their authority. People are increasingly creating their own moral frameworks, their own definitions of success, their own spiritual practices. Zarathustra's journey from the mountain represents anyone who has stepped outside conventional thinking and wants to share a new vision of human possibility. As we prepare to follow Zarathustra on his philosophical adventure, remember that this isn't just ancient philosophy. It's a roadmap for anyone brave enough to question everything they've been told about how to live. So settle in with that coffee, because we're about to explore what it really means to create your own values in a world where the old certainties no longer hold. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your cup, as we dive into one of the most profound and transformative ideas Friedrich Nietzsche ever conceived. In the Three Metamorphoses, Zarathustra presents us with a spiritual roadmap that feels as relevant today as it did over a century ago. This isn't just ancient philosophy gathering dust on a shelf. This is a mirror reflecting the very journey each of us takes as we grow, question, and ultimately create our own meaning in life. Nietzsche begins with a simple yet powerful question: how does the human spirit transform itself? And his answer comes in the form of three distinct metamorphoses, three fundamental stages of spiritual development that we all experience, whether we realize it or not. Think about your own life for a moment. Can you identify periods where you felt like you were carrying heavy burdens, times when you rebelled against everything around you, and moments when you approached life with fresh eyes and boundless creativity? These aren't random phases. They're the camel, the lion, and the child. The first metamorphosis transforms the spirit into a camel. Now, you might wonder, why a camel? Picture this magnificent beast of burden, kneeling in the sand, allowing heavy loads to be placed upon its back without complaint. The camel represents our capacity to bear weight, to accept responsibility, to shoulder the traditions, values, and expectations that society places upon us. In our modern world, this is the college student dutifully following a predetermined path, the young professional climbing the corporate ladder according to established rules, the person who says, "I should more often than I want to." But here's where it gets fascinating. Nietzsche isn't dismissing this stage. The camel phase is necessary. It's where we build strength, where we learn discipline, where we develop the muscles of endurance. Think about the medical student grinding through years of study, or the apprentice craftsman learning traditional techniques. They're building the foundation that will later support their transformation. The camel asks, "What is the heaviest thing I can bear?" and then proceeds to carry it across the desert of conventional wisdom. Yet something remarkable happens in that desert of tradition and duty. The camel transforms into a lion. This second metamorphosis is perhaps the most dramatic and, for many of us, the most familiar. The lion represents the spirit of rebellion, the fierce no that roars against inherited values. If the camel asks, "What should I carry?" the lion declares, "I will not carry this anymore." Consider the moment when you first questioned authority figures you'd always trusted, or when you realized that the career path everyone expected you to follow wasn't actually yours. Remember the teenager who suddenly sees their parents as fallible human beings, or the adult who walks away from a prestigious job because it feels like a golden cage. This is the lion awakening. The lion doesn't just reject, it destroys old idols to create space for something new. But here's what's crucial to understand. The lion, for all its magnificent power, cannot create new values. It can only tear down the old ones. The lion can say no with tremendous force, but it struggles to say yes to anything genuinely new. It's the revolutionary who knows exactly what they're against but can't quite articulate what they're for. It's the person who leaves their old life behind but finds themselves wandering in a wilderness of their own making. This is why the third metamorphosis is so essential, the transformation into a child. Now, think about this carefully. When Nietzsche speaks of becoming a child, he's not advocating for naivety or irresponsibility. He's pointing to something far more profound, the capacity for what he calls sacred yes-saying. The child represents innocence not as ignorance, but as the ability to approach life without the weight of cynicism, to create without being paralyzed by the fear of judgment. Watch a child at play, completely absorbed in building something with blocks. They're not thinking about whether their creation meets established architectural standards or whether it will impress anyone. They're creating for the pure joy of creation itself. This is the spirit Nietzsche wants us to reclaim, not the child's lack of knowledge, but the child's freedom from the burden of how things should be done. In our contemporary world, this might be the entrepreneur who starts a company not because market research guarantees success, but because they believe in their vision. It's the artist who creates without worrying about critics, the person who chooses love over logic, the individual who dares to live according to their own values rather than society's expectations, or their own rebellious reactions to those expectations. What makes this progression so powerful is that each stage builds upon the previous one. You need the camel's strength to carry you through the lion's destructive phase, and you need the lion's courage to clear space for the child's creativity. It's not a linear journey. We cycle through these metamorphoses throughout our lives, sometimes within a single day or even a single decision. As we close this exploration, consider where you find yourself today. Are you the camel, dutifully bearing responsibilities, the lion, roaring against constraints, or perhaps you're discovering the child's capacity to create something entirely new? Understanding these metamorphoses isn't about rushing to the final stage. It's about recognizing the sacred nature of wherever you are in your own transformation. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your cup, and I'm about to tell you about one of the most provocative chapters in all of philosophy. Nietzsche's The New Idol isn't just some dusty old text about government theory. It's a wake-up call that feels more relevant today than ever before. So settle in, because we're about to explore how the state, this thing we often take for granted, might actually be the greatest threat to your individual soul. Zarathustra descends from his mountain once again, and this time he's got something urgent to say about what he calls the new idol. Now, what's this idol he's talking about? It's not some golden calf or marble statue. It's something far more subtle and pervasive. It's the state itself, the government, the political machine that promises everything and delivers a kind of spiritual emptiness that most people don't even realize they're experiencing. Think about this for a moment. When did we start believing that the state could solve all our problems? When did we begin looking to politicians and bureaucrats as our saviors? Nietzsche saw this happening in his time, but imagine what he'd think about today's world, where we expect the government to regulate everything from what we eat to how we think about ourselves. Zarathustra calls the state the coldest of all cold monsters, and here's why that metaphor is so brilliant. A monster devours, but a cold monster devours without passion, without even the honest brutality of a wild beast. The state consumes individuals not through dramatic violence, though that happens too, but through something far more insidious. It convinces people to willingly surrender their individual will, their creativity, their authentic selves, all in exchange for the promise of security and belonging. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The state doesn't just demand your obedience, it demands your worship. It becomes a replacement for God, a new idol that promises meaning and purpose. But unlike the old gods, which at least pointed toward something transcendent, this new idol points only toward itself. It says, "I am the people," but Nietzsche argues this is a lie. The state isn't the people, it's a machine that feeds on people. Consider how this plays out in our daily lives. How often do you hear someone say, "There ought to be a law about that," when they encounter something they don't like? We've become so accustomed to looking toward the state for solutions that we've forgotten how to solve problems ourselves, how to take responsibility, how to create meaning through our own actions and choices. The state promises to make life easier, safer, more predictable, but at what cost? Here's a story that might illuminate this. Imagine you're an artist, and you have a vision for a beautiful mural that expresses something deep about the human condition. But before you can paint it, you need permits, approvals, committees to review your work for appropriate content, environmental impact studies for the paint you'll use, and insurance forms in case someone doesn't like what you've created. By the time you've navigated all these requirements, has your original vision survived? Or has it been transformed into something safe, sanitized, approved, but no longer truly yours? This is what Nietzsche means when he talks about the state as a destroyer of peoples. Not that it literally kills everyone, but that it kills the spirit that makes peoples creative, vital, and authentically human. The state offers you an identity: citizen, taxpayer, voter. But these are hollow identities compared to the rich, complex, contradictory identity you could create for yourself. But here's the thing that makes this so insidious. The state doesn't force this on you. You choose it. People flock to the new idol because it's easier than the hard work of creating meaning for yourself. It's easier to let someone else tell you what's right and wrong than to develop your own moral compass. It's easier to blame the government for your problems than to take responsibility for your own life. Now think about this. What would it mean to step away from this idol? Nietzsche isn't necessarily calling for anarchy. He's calling for something much more radical. He's calling for individuals to reclaim their power to create values, to think independently, to take responsibility for their own existence. He's asking you to stop looking for salvation from any external source, whether that's God, the state, or even other people, and start creating your own meaning. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or antisocial. It means becoming so fully yourself that you can contribute something genuinely valuable to the world, something that comes from your authentic nature rather than from what others expect of you. The greatest gift you can give to humanity isn't your obedience to the collective. It's your commitment to becoming who you truly are. As we move forward in our journey through Zarathustra's teachings, Remember this challenge to question every authority that asks for your unthinking devotion. The next time someone promises to solve your problems from the outside, ask yourself, what am I being asked to give up, and is it worth it? Picture this. You're sitting across from a friend who's just witnessed something that's been haunting them, and they're trying to make sense of what they saw. That's exactly the energy Nietzsche brings us in The Pale Criminal, one of the most psychologically penetrating sections of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Grab your coffee a little tighter, because we're about to dive into the murky waters of guilt, conscience, and what it really means to be moral. Zarathustra encounters a criminal, but not the kind you might expect from a crime drama. This isn't some hardened, defiant figure. Instead, he meets what Nietzsche calls the pale criminal, a man whose very complexion tells the story of his inner torment. The paleness isn't just physical, it's the color of a soul drained by guilt, a conscience that has turned against itself so violently that it's consuming the person from within. Now think about this for a moment. How many times have you seen someone, maybe even yourself, become physically ill from guilt? That knot in your stomach when you know you've done something wrong, the way shame can literally make you pale, the sleepless nights when your conscience won't let you rest. Nietzsche is painting a picture that's as relevant today as it was over a century ago, because human nature hasn't changed that much. But here's where Nietzsche gets really interesting, and frankly, a bit uncomfortable for many of us. He suggests that this pale criminal is actually closer to understanding something profound about human nature than the so-called good people who never question their moral assumptions. The criminal in his torment has at least confronted the reality of his own capacity for both creation and destruction. He's faced the abyss within himself, even if it's driven him to despair. Think about the people you know who seem to glide through life with perfect moral certainty. They always know what's right and wrong. They never seem to struggle with difficult ethical decisions, and they're quick to judge others. Nietzsche would argue that these people might actually be more dangerous than our pale criminal, because they've never truly examined the foundations of their beliefs. They're operating on autopilot, following rules without understanding why those rules exist or whether they're still relevant. The pale criminal, on the other hand, has shattered that comfortable illusion. His crime, whatever it was, has forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth that morality isn't as black and white as we'd like to believe. He's discovered that he contains multitudes, that within him exists both the capacity for love and the capacity for harm. This knowledge has made him pale, has drained him, but it's also made him more honest about human nature than those who live in moral comfort. Consider how this plays out in our modern world. We see it in the way society treats people who have made serious mistakes. Take someone who's committed a crime and served their time. They often carry that paleness, that burden of guilt, for years afterward. Society continues to punish them long after the legal system has supposedly done its work. But what if, as Nietzsche suggests, these people who have confronted their own darkness actually have something valuable to teach us about the human condition? This doesn't mean Nietzsche is advocating for crime or celebrating harmful behavior. Rather, he's pointing out the psychological complexity that traditional morality often ignores. The pale criminal understands something that the comfortably moral person doesn't, that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart, not between different groups of people. Now, here's where this gets really practical for our daily lives. How often do we create our own version of paleness through excessive guilt? Think about the way we torture ourselves over small mistakes, the way we replay embarrassing moments from years ago, the way we let shame color our entire self-perception. Nietzsche is suggesting that this kind of self-punishment might actually be a form of moral cowardice, a way of avoiding the harder work of truly understanding ourselves and taking responsibility for creating our own values. The truly courageous path, according to Zarathustra, isn't to live in moral certainty or to drown in guilt, but to acknowledge our complexity and use that knowledge to create something meaningful. Instead of being paralyzed by shame or comfortable in righteousness, we can choose to see our mistakes and our capacity for both good and harm as raw material for building a more authentic life. This connects directly to Nietzsche's broader project of encouraging us to become who we truly are, rather than simply conforming to inherited moral codes. The pale criminal, for all his suffering, has at least begun this journey of self-discovery, even if it's led him to a dark place. As we move forward in our exploration of Zarathustra's wisdom, we'll see how this theme of moral complexity continues to unfold, challenging us to think more deeply about the difference between genuine ethics and mere rule-following, between authentic guilt and destructive shame. Picture yourself settling into your favorite chair with a steaming cup of coffee as we continue our journey through Nietzsche's profound masterpiece. We've been walking alongside Zarathustra as he descends from his mountain solitude, and now we encounter one of the most intimate and revealing passages in the entire work. In On the Tree on the Mountainside, Nietzsche gives us what feels like a private counseling session between a wise teacher and a struggling young seeker. Imagine you're hiking up a mountain path when you come across a young man sitting beneath a tree, staring out at the vast landscape below. He's been there for hours, wrestling with questions that feel too big for his heart to hold. This is exactly the scene Zarathustra stumbles upon, and what unfolds next is a conversation that cuts right to the core of human ambition, loneliness, and the price we pay for trying to rise above our circumstances. The young man Zarathustra encounters isn't just any wanderer. He's someone who has tasted greatness, someone who has felt the intoxicating pull of standing above the crowd. But here's the thing about climbing mountains: whether literal or metaphorical, the higher you go, the thinner the air becomes, and the fewer companions you find walking beside you. This young seeker has discovered what every ambitious person eventually learns: the path to excellence is often a solitary one. Now, think about this in your own life. Have you ever found yourself succeeding at something, maybe in your career or personal growth, only to realize that your old friends don't quite understand your journey anymore? Maybe you've started reading philosophy while they're still gossiping about celebrities, or you've begun questioning assumptions they take for granted. It's a lonely feeling, isn't it? You're growing, evolving, becoming more than you were, but the cost is a kind of isolation that can feel almost unbearable. Zarathustra recognizes this struggle immediately because he's lived it himself. He sees in this young man the same restless energy that drove him to his own mountain retreat. The youth is caught in what we might call the growth paradox. The very process that makes us stronger and wiser also separates us from those who remain content with easier paths. But here's where Nietzsche's insight becomes particularly sharp and relevant to our modern world. The young man's problem isn't just loneliness. It's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from premature ambition. He's reaching for heights he hasn't yet earned through genuine self-development. Think of it like trying to bench press twice your body weight when you've barely mastered push-ups. The desire is admirable, but the foundation isn't there yet. Zarathustra tells him something that might sound harsh at first but is actually deeply compassionate. You are not yet ready for solitude. This isn't a judgment, it's a diagnosis. The young man is experiencing what we might call imposed isolation rather than chosen solitude. There's a world of difference between these two states. Imposed isolation happens when we outgrow our current circle but haven't yet developed the inner strength to thrive alone. Chosen solitude, on the other hand, comes from a place of fullness, not emptiness. Consider the difference between a teenager who sits alone at lunch because nobody wants to sit with them, versus a successful artist who chooses to spend weekends alone in their studio, completely absorbed in their creative work. Both are alone, but the quality of that aloneness is completely different. One comes from rejection and insecurity, the other from purpose and self-possession. Zarathustra's advice to the young man is essentially this: stop trying to escape your humanity before you've fully embraced it. Stop reaching for the mountaintop before you've learned to walk confidently in the valleys. This doesn't mean settling for mediocrity or abandoning your dreams. It means recognizing that true strength comes from integration, not escape. In our current age of social media and constant comparison, this message feels more relevant than ever. How many of us are trying to project an image of having made it before we've done the deep work of actually making it? How many of us are performing a version of success that leaves us feeling hollow inside? We're living in what you might call a culture of premature solitude, where people isolate themselves behind screens and curated online personas, instead of doing the messy, difficult work of genuine human connection and self-development. The tree on the mountainside becomes a powerful metaphor here. Trees that grow in harsh, isolated conditions often become stunted and twisted, while those that grow in rich soil surrounded by other trees develop strong root systems and towering heights. The young man has tried to plant himself on the mountainside before developing the roots necessary to thrive in such challenging conditions. As we prepare to move deeper into Zarathustra's teachings, this encounter reminds us that the path to becoming who we're meant to be isn't about escaping our current circumstances, but about fully engaging with them until we've extracted every lesson they have to offer. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do isn't to climb higher, but to descend back into the world and learn to love it completely before we attempt to transcend it. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, and someone at the next table is passionately explaining why their entire life is just a waiting room for something better. They're not talking about a vacation or a new job. They're talking about death, about how this whole messy, beautiful, complicated existence we're living right now is just a rehearsal for the real show that comes after we die. You'd probably want to shake them gently and say, "But what about right now? What about this moment, this breath, this cup of coffee in your hands?" Well, my friend, that's exactly the conversation Nietzsche is having with us in this powerful section called The Preachers of Death. Zarathustra encounters these figures throughout his journey, people who have made an art form out of convincing others that life is essentially a burden to be endured rather than a gift to be embraced. These aren't necessarily religious leaders, though they certainly include them. Think about it. How many people do you know who seem to be perpetually waiting for life to begin? They're saving their joy for retirement, their love for the perfect person, their dreams for when conditions are just right. The preachers of death come in many forms, and Nietzsche wants us to recognize them not just in others, but potentially within ourselves. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. Zarathustra doesn't dismiss these preachers with simple mockery. He understands something profound about human psychology, that the glorification of death often springs from a deep exhaustion with life itself. Imagine someone who has been so beaten down by disappointment, so worn thin by struggle, that the idea of eternal rest becomes more appealing than the prospect of another day. It's heartbreaking, really. Nietzsche sees this and recognizes that behind every preacher of death is often someone who has lost touch with their own vitality, their own capacity for joy and creation. But here's the crucial insight that makes this relevant to our modern world. These preachers of death aren't just talking about literal death. They're promoting what we might call a living death, a way of being in the world that's so focused on escape, on somewhere else, on some other time, that it completely misses the richness of what's actually here. Think about our contemporary culture for a moment. How often do we encounter messages that essentially tell us that happiness is always just one purchase, one promotion, one relationship away? How many of us scroll through social media, comparing our inner experience to others' highlight reels, concluding that real life must be happening somewhere else, to someone else? Zarathustra offers a different vision, and it's both challenging and liberating. He suggests that the antidote to the preachers of death isn't naive optimism or denial of life's genuine difficulties. Instead, it's what he calls a wholehearted embrace of existence in all its complexity. This means saying yes not just to the pleasant moments, but to the entire human experience, the struggles that shape us, the losses that deepen us, the uncertainties that keep us growing. Consider this practical example. You're facing a difficult period at work, dealing with a challenging boss or a project that seems impossible. The preacher of death mentality would have you constantly fantasizing about escape, about retirement, about a different job, about how much better things will be when this is all over. But what if, instead, you could find meaning and even growth in navigating this challenge? What if you could discover strengths you didn't know you had, or develop skills that will serve you for years to come? This doesn't mean pretending the situation isn't difficult, but rather engaging with it fully instead of mentally checking out. The most profound aspect of Nietzsche's critique is his recognition that the preachers of death often have the best intentions. They genuinely believe they're offering comfort to those who suffer. But Zarathustra argues that this kind of comfort ultimately diminishes human potential. It's like offering someone a permanent painkiller instead of helping them build the strength to heal and grow stronger. Now, think about this in terms of how we support each other through difficult times. Are we inadvertently becoming preachers of death when we encourage friends to just get through hard periods rather than finding ways to thrive within them? Are we promoting a kind of emotional bypass when we suggest that the goal is simply to minimize discomfort rather than to engage deeply with life's full spectrum of experiences? What Zarathustra ultimately calls for is nothing short of revolutionary, a complete revaluation of how we understand the relationship between life and death, between suffering and meaning, between the present moment and our hopes for the future. He's not asking us to become reckless or to ignore genuine wisdom about planning and preparation. Rather, he's inviting us to recognize that this life, right here, right now, with all its imperfections and uncertainties, is not a dress rehearsal for something better. It's the main event, and the quality of our engagement with it determines not just our happiness, but our very humanity. As we move forward in our exploration of Zarathustra's wisdom, we'll discover that this critique of the preachers of death sets the foundation for understanding what it truly means to live fully, to create meaning, and to embrace our power as conscious beings in an uncertain world. Picture this: you're at a dinner party and someone brings an incredibly expensive bottle of wine. They make a big show of presenting it, telling everyone how much it cost, how rare it is, and how generous they're being. Now contrast that with your grandmother quietly slipping an extra 20 into your pocket when you're struggling to make rent, telling you it's nothing while her eyes sparkle with genuine care. Which gesture feels more powerful? Which one actually transforms something inside you? This distinction between performative giving and authentic generosity lies at the very heart of what Nietzsche explores in the Bestowing Virtue, one of the most profound sections of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Zarathustra has been wandering, teaching, challenging everything we think we know about morality and human nature. Now he turns his piercing gaze towards something we all think we understand: giving. But here's where Nietzsche does what he does best. He flips our assumptions upside down and shakes out all the comfortable certainties we've been carrying around. Think about how we typically view charity and altruism in our culture. We praise the philanthropist who donates millions to build a hospital wing with their name on it. We admire the celebrity who posts about their charitable work on social media. We've created entire systems around tax deductions for giving, as if generosity needs to be incentivized and measured. But Zarathustra suggests something radical. What if most of what we call virtue is actually a subtle form of selfishness? What if our giving often diminishes, rather than elevates both the giver and receiver? Now, think about this for a moment. Have you ever received help that made you feel small? Maybe someone helped you financially but kept reminding you of their generosity. Maybe someone offered advice with an undertone that suggested you couldn't figure things out yourself. This is what Nietzsche calls the virtue that diminishes. Giving that's really about the giver's ego, their need to feel superior, their desire for gratitude and recognition. Zarathustra paints a vivid picture of this false virtue. He describes people who give like merchants, always calculating the return on their moral investment. They bestow gifts like a king throwing coins to peasants, maintaining the hierarchy even as they appear generous. Their charity becomes a leash, their kindness a cage. The recipient becomes forever indebted, forever reminded of their neediness, forever positioned as lesser. It's giving that creates dependency rather than empowerment. But then Zarathustra reveals something beautiful, the concept of true bestowing virtue. This isn't about giving things, it's about giving from your overflow. Imagine a mountain spring that flows not because it feels obligated to water the valley below, but because it's so full it cannot help but overflow. The spring doesn't expect gratitude from the flowers it nourishes. It doesn't keep a ledger of the lives it sustains. It gives because giving is its nature when it's abundant. This is where the philosophy becomes deeply personal and practical. The bestowing virtue isn't about having money or resources to give away. It's about becoming so full of life, wisdom, creativity, and joy that you naturally overflow into the lives of others. Think of the teacher who's so passionate about their subject that they inspire students without trying. Consider the friend who's so genuinely happy that their presence lifts everyone around them. Picture the artist who creates not for fame or money, but because they're bursting with something that must be expressed. Here's what's revolutionary about this idea. It suggests that the highest form of giving requires you to first become something worth giving. Before you can truly bestow virtue, you must cultivate virtue. Before you can overflow with wisdom, you must become wise. Before you can share joy, you must discover what genuinely brings you alive. It's the complete opposite of the guilt-driven charity that says you should give even when you're empty, even when you're struggling, even when you have nothing meaningful to offer. Zarathustra uses the metaphor of the sun, which gives light and warmth not out of duty but from its very essence. The sun doesn't deliberate about whether the earth deserves its rays. It doesn't calculate whether it's giving too much or expect anything in return. It shines because that's what it means to be the sun. When humans operate from this principle, their giving becomes transformative rather than transactional. This philosophy challenges our modern obsession with virtue signaling and performative goodness. It asks uncomfortable questions about our motivations. Are we giving because we're genuinely overflowing with something valuable, or are we giving to feel good about ourselves, to appear virtuous, to maintain our self-image as good people? The bestowing virtue also suggests that the highest gift we can give others is not our resources, but our example of what it means to live fully. When you become truly alive, truly yourself, truly engaged with your own growth and creativity, you give others permission to do the same. Your flourishing becomes an invitation for others to flourish. As we'll discover in the chapters ahead, this understanding of giving and virtue becomes foundational to everything Zarathustra teaches about creating meaning in a world where old certainties have crumbled. It's about learning to give like the sun, naturally, abundantly, and without keeping score. Welcome back to another chapter in our journey through Nietzsche's mind-bending masterpiece. Pour yourself that fresh cup of coffee, because we're about to dive into one of the most psychologically penetrating sections of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a chapter called The Tarantulas. Now, before you start wondering if we're suddenly talking about spiders, let me tell you that Nietzsche has something far more venomous in mind. Picture this scene. Zarathustra stumbles upon a group of what he calls tarantulas, but these aren't eight-legged creatures scurrying across the desert floor. These are human beings, and Nietzsche uses this spider metaphor to expose something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. These tarantulas represent those people who disguise their thirst for revenge as a noble pursuit of justice. Think about that for a moment. How often have you seen someone claim they want fairness when what they really want is payback? Zarathustra watches these creatures and sees through their elaborate moral disguises. They speak eloquently about equality, about justice, about making things right in the world. But underneath all that righteous rhetoric, he detects the unmistakable scent of resentment. These tarantulas have been wounded, humiliated, or left behind by life, and now they want to drag everyone else down to their level. They don't want to climb higher. They want to make sure no one else can climb either. Now, think about this in our modern context. Have you ever encountered someone on social media who seems perpetually outraged, constantly calling for justice, but somehow always targeting those who are successful, talented, or simply different. Nietzsche would say you're looking at a tarantula. These are people who have transformed their personal pain into a universal crusade, convincing themselves and others that their desire for revenge is actually moral righteousness. The genius of this metaphor becomes even clearer when you consider how a tarantula actually hunts. It doesn't chase its prey openly. Instead, it waits in its web perfectly still until something gets caught. Then it strikes with venom that paralyzes its victim. Nietzsche's human tarantulas operate similarly. They create elaborate ideological webs, complex theories about oppression, inequality, and social justice, and then wait for successful, creative, or independent people to get entangled. Once caught, these victims are injected with guilt, shame, and the poison of resentment. But here's where Nietzsche's insight becomes truly profound. He's not simply dismissing all concerns about justice or equality. Instead, he's making a crucial distinction between genuine moral concern and disguised revenge. Real justice, he suggests, comes from strength, creativity, and the desire to build something better. It flows from abundance, not scarcity. When someone creates value, solves problems, or genuinely helps others, that's justice in action. But when someone's primary motivation is to tear down, to punish, to make others suffer because they themselves have suffered, that's the tarantula's venom at work. Consider how this plays out in workplace dynamics. Have you ever worked with someone who constantly complains about unfairness, who seems to spend more energy undermining colleagues than actually contributing? They might frame their behavior as holding people accountable or fighting for the little guy. But often what you're seeing is resentment dressed up as righteousness. The tarantula doesn't want to succeed. It wants others to fail. Zarathustra's response to these creatures is fascinating. He doesn't try to argue with them or convince them they're wrong. Instead, he simply refuses to be caught in their web. He recognizes that engaging with the tarantula on its own terms means accepting its premise that life is fundamentally about settling scores. Zarathustra chooses a different path entirely, the path of creation rather than destruction, of building rather than tearing down. This brings us to one of Nietzsche's most challenging ideas, that our modern obsession with equality might sometimes mask a deeper resentment against excellence itself. Now, I'm not suggesting that all concerns about fairness are invalid, that would be absurd. But Nietzsche is asking us to examine our motivations honestly. When we call for justice, are we trying to lift people up, or are we trying to bring people down? Are we motivated by love and creativity, or by envy and revenge? The tarantulas represent something universal in human nature, the temptation to transform our pain into someone else's problem. When life wounds us, we face a choice. We can use that pain as fuel for growth, creativity, and genuine contribution to the world. Or we can spin it into a web designed to trap others, convinced that making them suffer will somehow heal our own wounds. As we close this exploration of Nietzsche's tarantulas, consider this question. In your own life, when you've been hurt or disappointed, which path have you chosen? Have you used your struggles as stepping stones to become stronger and more compassionate, or have you sometimes found yourself spinning webs of resentment? The honest answer might surprise you, and that honesty is the first step toward transcending the tarantula's venom. Next time, we'll explore how Zarathustra proposes we move beyond this cycle of revenge disguised as justice, toward something far more challenging and ultimately more rewarding. Picture this. You're sitting alone on your balcony at 2 a.m, the city lights twinkling below like scattered diamonds, and suddenly you're hit with this profound sense of isolation that's both crushing and strangely beautiful. That's exactly where Nietzsche takes us in the Night Song, one of the most haunting and deeply personal sections of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Grab your coffee a little tighter, because we're about to dive into the darkest corners of the human soul, where even the strongest among us confront their deepest vulnerabilities. Zarathustra stands alone in the darkness, and what pours out of him isn't the confident proclamations we've heard before, but something raw and achingly human. He speaks of being light itself, yet paradoxically, he cannot receive light from others. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever been the person everyone comes to for advice, the one who lights up every room, yet somehow you feel completely alone in your struggles? That's the cruel irony Zarathustra reveals here. The very qualities that make us sources of strength for others can become barriers to receiving the warmth and understanding we desperately crave ourselves. Nietzsche paints this picture with devastating clarity. It is night, and now all fountains speak more loudly, and my soul too is a fountain. There's something about darkness that makes us more honest, isn't there? In our modern world, we see this played out constantly. Think about those late-night conversations that cut deeper than any daytime chat, or how social media becomes more vulnerable and real after midnight. The night strips away our pretenses, and suddenly we're confronted with truths we spend our daylight hours avoiding. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is vintage Nietzsche brilliance. Zarathustra doesn't just wallow in his loneliness, he transforms it into something profound. He recognizes that his very nature as a giver, as someone who overflows with wisdom and strength, creates an unbridgeable distance between himself and others. It's like being a star, he suggests. Stars shine their light across vast distances, warming and guiding others, but they remain fundamentally alone in the cosmic darkness. Now think about this in your own life. Have you ever felt that the more you grow, the more you develop yourself, the harder it becomes to find people who truly understand your journey? This isn't just philosophical navel-gazing, though. Nietzsche is touching on something we all experience in our age of connection paradox. We're more connected than ever through technology, yet studies consistently show rising rates of loneliness and isolation. We're all broadcasting our light through screens, reaching others, influencing them, sharing our thoughts and experiences, yet somehow we remain fundamentally alone behind those glowing rectangles. The Night Song speaks directly to our modern condition, where we can have thousands of followers but struggle to find genuine connection. What makes this section so powerful is how Zarathustra embraces his loneliness rather than fighting it. He doesn't seek to cure it or eliminate it. Instead, he recognizes it as an essential part of his nature, perhaps even the source of his strength. This is radically different from our typical approach to difficult emotions, isn't it? We usually try to fix loneliness, medicate it away, or distract ourselves from it. But Zarathustra suggests something more challenging. What if loneliness is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be understood and even celebrated? Consider the artists, innovators, and deep thinkers throughout history. From Van Gogh painting alone in his studio to Einstein working through his theories in solitude, many of humanity's greatest contributions have emerged from profound isolation. The Night Song suggests that this isn't coincidence but necessity. Sometimes we must be alone to truly see, to think originally, to create something genuinely new. The darkness becomes not an enemy but a canvas for our deepest insights. There's also a beautiful paradox here that speaks to anyone who's ever felt like an outsider. Zarathustra's very alienation from others is what allows him to understand them so deeply. His loneliness gives him perspective on the human condition that those comfortably embedded in social connections might never achieve. It's like being the only sober person at a party, seeing clearly what everyone else misses in their intoxicated blur of social interaction. As we sit with these ideas over our coffee, we're invited to reconsider our own relationship with solitude and longing. Maybe those moments when we feel most alone are also when we're most authentically ourselves. Maybe the ache of loneliness isn't something to escape but something to listen to, like a compass pointing toward unexplored territories of our soul. The Night Song doesn't offer easy comfort, but it offers something perhaps more valuable: the recognition that our deepest struggles can become our greatest sources of wisdom and strength. In our next exploration, we'll see how Zarathustra channels this hard-won self-knowledge into even more challenging territory. But for now, let the darkness speak its truth. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, steam rising between us, and I'm about to tell you about one of the most beautiful and mysterious chapters in all of Nietzsche's work. We've been following Zarathustra on his journey down from the mountain, watching him wrestle with profound questions about life, meaning, and human potential. Now we arrive at something truly special called the dance song, where philosophy transforms into poetry, and wisdom becomes as graceful as movement itself. Imagine Zarathustra wandering through a meadow at twilight, and suddenly he encounters a group of young women dancing. But this isn't just any dance, and these aren't just any dancers. They represent life itself, personified as a wild, unpredictable, enchanting woman who both attracts and confounds us. Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly alive? Not just going through the motions of your daily routine, but genuinely, vibrantly alive. That feeling, that electric sense of being fully present in your own existence, is what Nietzsche is trying to capture here. The dance becomes a metaphor for our relationship with life itself. Life, in Nietzsche's vision, is like a capricious dance partner who sometimes leads us into beautiful, flowing movements, and sometimes steps on our toes or spins us until we're dizzy and disoriented. She's magnificent and maddening, graceful and clumsy, giving and demanding all at once. Think about your own relationship with life. Haven't you experienced those moments when everything flows perfectly, when you feel in sync with the world around you? And then there are those other times when life seems to be playing tricks on you, when nothing goes according to plan, when you feel like you're stumbling through a dance you never learned the steps to. What's remarkable about this chapter is how Nietzsche presents joy and sorrow not as opposites to be reconciled, but as dance partners who need each other. Consider this. Every great dancer knows that tension and release, effort and ease, must work together to create something beautiful. You can't have a meaningful dance that's all smooth gliding, just as you can't have one that's all sharp, jarring movements. The beauty emerges from the interplay, the conversation between different energies and emotions. This connects to something we all struggle with in our modern world. We live in a culture that's obsessed with happiness, with positive thinking, with avoiding discomfort at all costs. We pop pills for sadness, distract ourselves from difficult emotions, and chase endless pleasures. But Nietzsche is suggesting something radically different here. He's saying that trying to have only the pleasant parts of life is like trying to dance only the easy steps. You might avoid falling, but you'll never create anything truly beautiful or meaningful. Think about the people you most admire, the ones who seem to possess a deep, unshakable joy. I bet if you look closely, you'll find they're not people who have avoided suffering, but people who have learned to dance with it. They've discovered what Zarathustra is learning in this meadow, that embracing the full spectrum of human experience, including its difficulties and sorrows, actually leads to a richer, more authentic happiness. The dance song itself becomes a kind of prayer, but not the kind you'd hear in most religious settings. This is a prayer of affirmation, a yes-saying to existence in all its complexity. When Zarathustra watches these dancers and eventually joins them, he's not trying to escape from the world or transcend it. He's diving deeper into it, accepting its rhythms, learning its steps, becoming one with its movement. Here's where this gets really practical for us today. How often do we resist the natural rhythms of our own lives? We fight against sadness when it comes. We push ourselves to be productive when our bodies and minds need rest. We resist change when life is trying to teach us new steps. But what if we approached our experiences more like dancers? What if we learned to feel the music of our circumstances and move with it rather than against it? This doesn't mean being passive or accepting terrible situations that need to be changed. A good dancer isn't passive. They're actively engaged, responsive, creative within the structure of the music. Similarly, embracing life doesn't mean accepting injustice or giving up on improvement. It means developing the wisdom to know when to lead and when to follow, when to resist and when to flow, when to leap boldly and when to move with quiet grace. As we prepare to move deeper into Zarathustra's journey, this dance song lingers in the air like a melody you can't quite forget. It reminds us that philosophy isn't just about thinking. It's about living, moving, responding to the world with our whole being. The question Nietzsche leaves us with is beautifully simple yet endlessly complex. Are you ready to dance with life? To say yes to the whole magnificent, difficult, joyful, sorrowful experience of being human? Picture this. You're sitting alone in a cemetery at twilight, surrounded by the ghosts of your former selves. The dreams you abandoned, the relationships that ended, the versions of yourself that you've outgrown and left behind. This is where Nietzsche takes us in the Grave Song, one of the most haunting and beautiful passages in all of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And honestly, it might be the most relatable chapter in the entire book, because who among us hasn't felt like we're mourning parts of ourselves that we've had to let die? Zarathustra finds himself on an island he calls the Island of Graves, but these aren't ordinary graves. They're the burial places of his youth, his past visions, his former dreams. Think about this for a moment. How many versions of yourself have you buried over the years? Maybe it was the version of you that believed in a certain career path, or the you that thought a particular relationship would last forever, or the idealistic you that believed the world worked differently than it actually does. Nietzsche isn't being morbid here. He's doing something far more profound. He's showing us that growth requires a kind of death, and that wisdom often comes wrapped in grief. Zarathustra sings to these graves, acknowledging what he's lost, but also recognizing why these deaths were necessary. It's like cleaning out your closet and finding clothes that no longer fit. You might feel a pang of nostalgia for who you were when you wore them, but you also understand that holding onto them would mean staying stuck in the past. The genius of this chapter lies in how it reframes our relationship with loss. In our culture, we're often told to get over things quickly, to move on, to focus on the positive. But Zarathustra does something different. He honors his losses. He acknowledges that these dead dreams and abandoned selves were real, they mattered, and they deserved recognition before being released. It's the difference between throwing away a photograph and having a proper funeral. Both accomplish the same practical goal, but one honors the significance of what's being let go. Now think about this in your own life. How often do we actually grieve the things we need to leave behind? When you finally accept that a toxic relationship needs to end, do you allow yourself to mourn the good parts before walking away? When you realize that a dream you've held for years isn't going to materialize, do you honor what that dream meant to you before pivoting to something new? Most of us just grit our teeth and push forward, but Zarathustra suggests there's wisdom in the grieving itself. Here's where it gets really interesting. Zarathustra doesn't just mourn passively. His grief becomes a song, a creative act. This is Nietzsche showing us that even our losses can be transformed into something beautiful, something meaningful. Think of the greatest artists you know. How many of their most powerful works came from processing loss, heartbreak, or disappointment? Leonard Cohen didn't write Hallelujah from a place of pure joy. He wrote it from the complex intersection of love, loss, and acceptance. The practical wisdom here is profound. When you're going through a difficult transition, when you're having to let go of something that once defined you, don't just endure it. Don't just survive it. See if you can find a way to honor it, to learn from it, to let it teach you something about who you're becoming. Maybe you write about it, or talk to a friend, or simply spend some quiet time acknowledging what this loss means. The goal isn't to wallow, but to extract whatever wisdom the experience has to offer. But here's the twist that makes this chapter so powerful. Zarathustra doesn't end his song in despair. He ends it with a kind of defiant hope. He recognizes that letting go of the past, even when it hurts, creates space for new possibilities. It's like pruning a tree. You cut away what's dead or dying not because you hate the tree, but because you want it to grow stronger and more beautiful. This connects to something we all struggle with in our hyperconnected, constantly documented modern world. We have photos and videos and social media posts that preserve every version of ourselves we've ever been. Sometimes this makes it harder to let go, harder to evolve, because we're constantly reminded of who we used to be. But Zarathustra's grave song teaches us that remembering and honoring the past doesn't mean we have to be imprisoned by it. As we move deeper into Zarathustra's journey, this chapter serves as a crucial turning point. It's only by fully grieving what he's lost that he can embrace what he's becoming. And that's the invitation Nietzsche extends to all of us. To be brave enough to let parts of ourselves die when they no longer serve us, to grieve those losses honestly, and then to sing our way into whatever comes next. Because that's what it means to be truly alive. Picture this. You're lying in bed, completely drained after one of those life-altering realizations that hits you like a freight train. Maybe you've just understood something profound about yourself, something that changes everything you thought you knew. That moment of exhaustion after revelation, that's exactly where we find Zarathustra in the Convalescent, one of the most psychologically rich chapters in Nietzsche's masterpiece. Zarathustra has been wrestling with his most challenging teaching, the eternal recurrence, and it's literally knocked him flat. For 7 days he lies motionless, unable to eat, barely breathing. His animals, the eagle and the serpent, watch over him like concerned friends. Now think about this. When was the last time you had an insight so powerful it physically overwhelmed you? Perhaps when you realized your career wasn't fulfilling you, or when you finally understood a toxic pattern in your relationships. That's the territory we're exploring here. The eternal recurrence isn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It's the idea that everything in your life, every joy and every pain, every triumph and every embarrassment, will repeat infinitely. Imagine having to live your exact same life over and over again, with all its mistakes and regrets. Most people would recoil in horror. But Zarathustra is teaching us something revolutionary. What if you could learn to love your life so completely that you'd willingly choose to live it again, exactly as it is? When Zarathustra finally awakens, his animals greet him with relief, telling him the world has been waiting for him. But here's where it gets interesting. They start reciting his own teachings back to him, almost like parrots. They understand the words, but they're missing the depth, the lived experience behind them. It's like when someone quotes your favorite book at you but clearly hasn't grasped its real meaning. Zarathustra realizes that his animals, well-meaning as they are turning his profound insights into mere chatter. This moment captures something we all experience in our modern world. How often do we see deep wisdom reduced to Instagram quotes or LinkedIn motivational posts? Someone shares a profound quote about resilience, but they've never actually been through the fire that teaches real resilience. The animals represent this tendency to intellectualize rather than truly embody wisdom. They can recite the lesson, but they haven't lived it. But here's where the real healing begins. Zarathustra doesn't get angry or frustrated with his animals. Instead, he shows them gentle understanding. He recognizes that they're doing their best to comprehend something that can only be fully grasped through direct experience. This is the beginning of his convalescence, his recovery. He's learning to accept not just the eternal recurrence of his own life, but the eternal recurrence of human limitation and misunderstanding. Think about a time when you tried to explain something deeply personal to a friend, maybe a spiritual experience, a moment of clarity, or a hard-won life lesson. Remember how they nodded and seemed to get it, but you could tell they were only grasping the surface. That frustration Zarathustra feels is universal, but his response teaches us something crucial about real wisdom. The wise person doesn't demand that others immediately understand their deepest insights. They accept that understanding comes slowly, through experience, not explanation. The chapter title, The Convalescent, is perfect because convalescence isn't just about getting better. It's about integrating an illness or trauma into your life story. When you're convalescing, you're not trying to pretend the difficult experience never happened. You're learning to live with it, to find meaning in it, even to be grateful for what it taught you. Zarathustra is doing exactly this with his overwhelming realization about eternal recurrence. In our therapy-conscious culture, we often talk about processing difficult experiences, But Zarathustra shows us something deeper than processing. He shows us integration. He's not trying to get over his revelation or move past it. He's learning to carry it as part of himself, to let it transform him without destroying him. This is what real psychological maturity looks like. Consider how this applies to your own life. Maybe you've had a painful breakup, a career setback, or a health scare that initially overwhelmed you. The convalescent approach isn't about getting back to normal. It's about becoming someone who can hold that experience as part of a richer, more complex understanding of life. You're not the same person you were before, and that's not a failure, it's evolution. As this chapter draws to a close, we see Zarathustra emerging not as someone who has conquered his doubts, but as someone who has learned to dance with them. He's discovered that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about learning to fall gracefully and rise with greater wisdom. The convalescent doesn't seek to avoid future wounds, but to develop the capacity to heal and grow from whatever life brings. This sets us up beautifully for what comes next in Zarathustra's journey, as he prepares to take his hard-won wisdom back into the world, knowing full well that most people will misunderstand him, just as his animals did. Picture this. You're scrolling through social media at 2 in the morning, that familiar hollow feeling settling in your chest. You've seen hundreds of posts, liked dozens of photos, maybe even commented on a few, but somehow you feel more disconnected than ever. That ache you're experiencing. Nietzsche would have recognized it immediately. He called it the great longing, and it's one of the most profound themes woven throughout Thus Spoke Zarathustra. When Nietzsche writes about the great longing, he's not talking about wanting a new car or craving your favorite dessert. This is something much deeper, much more fundamental to the human experience. It's that persistent yearning for genuine connection, for understanding, for meaning that seems to dance just beyond our reach. Think about the last time you felt truly understood by another person. Not just heard, but actually seen and comprehended at your core. How rare was that moment? How desperately do we all crave more of them? Zarathustra, Nietzsche's fictional prophet, experiences this longing as both a blessing and a curse. He descends from his mountain retreat, filled with wisdom and insights, desperate to share what he's learned with humanity. But here's the cruel irony that Nietzsche masterfully illustrates. The very depth of Zarathustra's understanding becomes a barrier to connection. His profound realizations about life, death, and human potential make him almost alien to the people he encounters in the marketplace below. Have you ever had an experience so transformative, so meaningful, that when you tried to share it with others, you felt like you were speaking a different language entirely? This dynamic plays out constantly in our modern world. Consider the brilliant scientist who makes groundbreaking discoveries, but struggles to explain their significance to anyone outside their field. Or think about the artist whose work emerges from deep personal truth, but finds no audience willing to engage with its complexity. The great longing isn't just about wanting to be understood. It's about the fundamental human need to bridge the gap between our inner worlds and the external reality we share with others. Nietzsche suggests that this longing is actually essential to human growth and creativity. Without it, we might become complacent, satisfied with surface-level interactions and shallow connections. The great longing pushes us to dig deeper, to risk vulnerability, to keep reaching across the void between one consciousness and another. It's the engine that drives all meaningful art, philosophy, and human connection. But it's also exhausting, isn't it? That constant reaching, that perpetual sense that something vital is missing. What's particularly fascinating about Nietzsche's treatment of this theme is how he shows that the great longing can't be satisfied through traditional means. Zarathustra doesn't find fulfillment by returning to conventional religion or by accepting societal norms. Instead, he must learn to embrace the longing itself as part of his authentic existence. This is where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes revolutionary and deeply practical for our contemporary lives. In our hyperconnected age, we often try to fill this existential void with digital interactions, endless entertainment, or consumer purchases. But how often do these substitutes actually satisfy the deeper yearning? When was the last time a Netflix binge or an online shopping spree left you feeling genuinely fulfilled rather than temporarily distracted? Nietzsche would argue that these are just elaborate ways of avoiding the uncomfortable reality of our fundamental aloneness and our deep need for authentic connection. The great longing also connects to Nietzsche's famous concept of eternal recurrence. If you had to live your current life exactly as it is, with all its unfulfilled longings and missed connections, over and over again for eternity, would you embrace it? The thought experiment forces us to confront whether we're living authentically or merely going through the motions. Are we honoring our deepest yearnings, or are we numbing them with comfortable distractions? Here's where the practical wisdom emerges from Nietzsche's seemingly abstract philosophy. The great longing isn't a problem to be solved, but a fundamental aspect of human existence to be embraced. When you feel that ache for deeper connection, for greater understanding, for more meaningful experiences, you're not broken or deficient. You're experiencing one of the most essentially human emotions possible. This perspective can transform how we approach relationships, creative endeavors, and personal growth. Instead of seeing unfulfilled longing as failure, we can recognize it as evidence of our capacity for depth and authenticity. The entrepreneur who feels misunderstood while pursuing an innovative vision, the parent who struggles to connect with their teenager, the friend who feels isolated despite being surrounded by people, all are experiencing variations of Zarathustra's great longing. As we transition into exploring more of Nietzsche's insights, remember that this yearning for connection and understanding isn't a weakness to overcome but a strength to cultivate. It's what separates mere existence from truly living, what transforms routine into meaning, and what keeps us reaching toward our highest potential even when the path seems impossibly difficult. The great longing is, paradoxically, both our burden and our greatest gift. We've traveled a long road together through Zarathustra's mountain wisdom, haven't we? From his first descent into the valley to his struggles with eternal recurrence, we've watched this strange prophet grapple with the biggest questions humans can ask. Now, as we settle into our final cup of coffee together, we reach the sign. The moment when everything Zarathustra has been building toward finally crystallizes into something beautiful and terrifying and utterly transformative. Picture this. Zarathustra wakes up one morning and something has fundamentally shifted. It's like when you've been wrestling with a problem for months, turning it over in your mind, and then suddenly, often when you're not even thinking about it, the answer arrives with such clarity it takes your breath away. That's what happens to Zarathustra in this final section. He experiences what he calls the sign, a moment of such profound recognition that it changes everything. Now think about this for a moment. How many times in your own life have you waited for a sign? Maybe you're stuck in a job that's slowly crushing your soul, and you keep hoping the universe will send you some clear indication of what to do next. Or perhaps you're in a relationship that feels more like habit than love, and you're desperately seeking some cosmic permission to make a change. We're all waiting for signs, aren't we? But Zarathustra's sign isn't what you might expect. The sign isn't some external validation or divine intervention. Instead, it's the moment when Zarathustra finally, completely, joyfully accepts himself and his mission. It's like a musician who's been practicing scales for years suddenly understanding that they don't need to wait for someone else to declare them ready. They simply begin to play their own music. Zarathustra realizes that he's been looking for permission to become who he already is. Think of it this way. Imagine you've been carrying a seed in your pocket your whole life, waiting for the perfect soil, the perfect weather, the perfect moment to plant it. Zarathustra's sign is the recognition that the seed has already been growing inside him all along. The waiting was the mistake. The readiness was always there. This connects beautifully to something we see in our modern world all the time. How often do we postpone our authentic lives? We tell ourselves we'll start that creative project when we have more time, we'll speak our truth when we're more confident, we'll pursue our dreams when the conditions are perfect. But Zarathustra's final insight cuts through all of that postponement like a sword through silk. The sign he receives is simply this: the time is always now. But here's where Nietzsche gets really interesting, and where this ancient wisdom becomes urgently relevant to our contemporary moment. Zarathustra's sign isn't just about personal transformation, it's about taking responsibility for the entire human project. In our age of climate crisis, political upheaval, and social fragmentation, this message hits differently than it might have a century ago. Consider this: we're living through a time when many people feel powerless, when the problems seem too big, when it's easier to scroll through social media than to engage with the messy work of creating meaning. Zarathustra's sign challenges all of that passivity. It says, stop waiting for someone else to fix things. Stop looking for a leader to follow blindly. Stop postponing your own creative participation in shaping reality. The sign is essentially this recognition: I am the one I've been waiting for, not in some narcissistic, self-aggrandizing way, but in the deepest possible sense. Each of us carries the capacity to create values, to generate meaning, to participate in the ongoing creation of what it means to be human. This isn't a burden. It's the most exhilarating freedom imaginable. Now think about what this means practically. When you're faced with a decision, instead of asking, "What should I do?" or "What would others think?" you might ask, "What would the highest version of myself create here?" When you encounter suffering, your own or others, instead of seeking someone to blame or some external salvation, you might ask, "How can I transform this into something life-affirming?" Zarathustra's final teaching is that we are not victims of existence, but its active creators. Every choice we make, every value we embrace, every relationship we nurture becomes part of the ongoing human experiment. This is both terrifying and magnificent. Terrifying because it means we can't hide behind excuses or external authorities. Magnificent because it means we're not powerless passengers but active participants in the great adventure of consciousness. The sign, ultimately, is the moment when we stop looking outside ourselves for meaning and start creating it from the inside out. It's when we realize that waiting for life to begin is itself a choice, and we can make a different choice right now, with this breath, in this moment. As we close this journey together, carrying Zarathustra's final gift back down into our own valleys and cities, remember this: you already carry everything you need to create a meaningful life. The sign you've been waiting for. It's been there all along, written in your own capacity to choose, to love, to create, to affirm existence in all its terrible beauty. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche presents a profound exploration of philosophy, morality, and the potential for human transformation. The narrative centers around the character Zarathustra, who shares his thoughts on the overman, the revaluation of values, and the eternal recurrence. Nietzsche challenges readers to question societal norms, embrace individualism, and seek personal enlightenment. Here are some key takeaways from the book. 1. Embrace the overman within you. Nietzsche's concept of the overman is about transcending ordinary human limits to achieve greatness. Start incredibly small by identifying one habit or belief that holds you back and work towards overcoming it. Be patient with yourself, as transformation is a gradual process. 2. Create your own values. Rather than adhering to societal norms, Nietzsche encourages us to establish our own values. Begin by reflecting on what truly matters to you and let those values guide your decisions. Remember, it's okay for your values to evolve as you grow. 3. Question everything. Nietzsche urges us to challenge traditional beliefs and think independently. Apply this by critically analyzing the information you consume, and don't be afraid to form your own opinions. Start by questioning a small, everyday assumption. 4. Accept the eternal recurrence. Nietzsche's idea of living life as if it will repeat infinitely encourages us to live authentically. Consider how your actions would change if you were to live them over and over again, and adjust accordingly to align with your true desires. 5. Celebrate life's challenges ***. Nietzsche views obstacles as opportunities for growth. When faced with difficulty, remind yourself that challenges are a natural part of life's journey toward self-improvement. Start by embracing small setbacks and using them as learning experiences. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.